welcome to the latest Farm Files episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. I'm one of your co-hosts, Sarah McNaughton, and I'm here with Kurt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we are powered by John Deere, so for all of your equipment and technology needs, see your local Deere dealer. So, Sarah, I'm listening to our intro music theme, and I'm thinking I like it, but maybe we should change it up. Maybe you should play cello, which I know you play, and my son Zach could do drums, so between the two of you, you could come up with some, new intro music. Do you think that'd work?
I love a good strings and percussion moment, but I have not picked up my cello in the last year, so I'm not sure that'd be super fair to Zach, but maybe I should start learning how to play the fiddle. I know I heard if you can play one string instrument, you can get it with playing all of them, so maybe I'll have to start up. How do you think that would go?
Well, it might be really good, so we'll have to wait and see. We'll see how your practice with the fiddle goes, I love music, but I'm not musically inclined in any way, shape, or form. So, the old joke is was standing by my dad singing in church. My dad couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. I mean, he just couldn't. But he would always say, Kurt, I always wished I could sing, but today I wished you could. So that was kind of our running joke. And so don't take any music ideas I have to heart at all. So because I don't know what I'm talking about. But I suppose we should get down to our topic of the day, right?
Definitely. And just to preface, as much as I love a good conspiracy theory, especially when ag is involved, as journalists, we of course stick to the hard facts, data, and research. So just wanted to throw that out there for everyone, since there's always so much speculation and conversation around these types of stories. Something that came up when we decided to pursue this topic for the podcast was a recent purchase by none other than Bill Gates in the northern Red River Valley here in North Dakota. And you were just wrapping up this story in Nebraska Farmer about foreign land ownership around that same time. And of course, this was a huge story around here because North Dakota at the time had some pretty strict corporate farming laws and regulations, which Gates managed to work around with the land trust to actually purchase the land. And Kurt, through your research, did you find out if Bill Gates also owns farmland in Nebraska?
Well, last December, it was widely reported in Nebraska that Gates owns about $113 million worth of Nebraska farmland. It covers about 19 counties, just over 20,000 acres. And this has been acquired since 2017. But most of those same reports, also made a point to note that these financial investments were not a part of the Gates Foundation portfolio or initiatives. That said, he's not the largest landowner in our state, although Nebraska's largely, privately owned state. I mean, the federal government is actually the largest single landowner. They have about 550,000 acres, but 60+% of that, I guess, is managed by the U.S. Forest Service through national forests and national grasslands. So it sounds like a lot, but it's really nothing compared to a lot of the western states. Ted Turner, I think the now 85-year-old media mogul, he founded CNN and TBS, and I think he owned the Atlanta Braves. He owns 445,000 acres in the state, so that's also very widely reported. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has about 228,000 acres. So, Gates is way down the line in Nebraska. However, I think that Gates and Ted Turner are both big landowners, not just in Nebraska, but across the nation from every report I've read recently. But there are other landowners who own more, right?
Yeah, so the Land Report 100 released for 2024 reports that Red Emerson and his family are the largest U.S. landowners with 2.4 million acres in California, Oregon, and Washington through their timber company, Sierra Pacific Industries. Liberty Media chairman John Malone is now second with 2.2 million acres, which is followed by Ted Turner and his 2 million acres. And Bill Gates is listed in the 2024 Land Report 100 at 42nd largest, which is around 275,000 acres total. Meanwhile, Cole and I are looking to purchase pasture land here around central North Dakota, but we have a really strong opinion of not taking land out of active production just to run our horses and roping steers on. And so that's something I'm always curious about if these individuals think about the production value in their land portfolio.
Right. And, the real attention as far as farmland ownership in the U.S. has been on foreign ownership lately. That's been in the headlines a lot. And I think some of that attention is centered around North Dakota, too, if I remember correctly, just kind of like what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. So aside from Bill Gates buying that farm, I think it was like 2022 by now. There was a large purchase of farmland actually just near my hometown in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And of course, there was a lot of opinions and contention with the military institution just by Grand Forks there, which is actually where my dad was stationed and where I grew up on. And so I heard a lot of thoughts from a lot of different farmers and individuals on this whole project. So a local North Dakota news site shared in April of 2023 that the Fufeng USA development agreement with the city of Grand Forks had been terminated. The city council voted unanimously to cancel the proposed Chinese-owned corn milling plant, citing national security concerns. No matter how people felt about the project itself or the country of origin for its owners, I always wonder, wouldn't that farmland be better used to be production land by somebody in the state? I think it all kind of depends on how you look at it.
Right. I wrote a story for Nebraska Farmer, as you said, about what foreign interests controlled farmland in Nebraska. So it's kind of along those lines. And I learned from a University of Nebraska Extension webinar about a majority of what we are calling, foreign controlled land in the state tied up in wind leases through Canadian wind energy companies. Now, China only controls like 19 acres in Nebraska, and that's through Syngenta, which is owned by ChemChina. USDA lists about 600,000 acres in our state controlled by Canadian companies. But after that story ran, I received a letter to the editor from David Brock, who is our former director of the Nebraska Energy Office. And he explained that this number is probably quite a bit less in reality because wind companies will lease an entire quarter section before even siting a wind turbine. So once the turbine's sited and it's built, there really is only, 1 to 3 acres tied up out of production, as we were talking, for each turbine operating. So, however, USDA reports the entire parcel under that lease in their reporting. So I learned something from that story. In Nebraska, Canada was number 1, Italy is second, Denmark's third, and China, which is in the news most, is way down the line, at least that is in Nebraska.
I never would have thought Italy would have been a big landowner there in Nebraska. Canada makes sense. It's kind of close. But yeah, Italy and Denmark kind of threw me because, China is definitely way more in the news when it comes to foreign land ownership.
Right.
And of course, here in the Dakotas, land ownership is always a huge discussion, especially like we're talking about this whole episode surrounding foreign entities. And I think often that farmers and ranchers really are the top advocates for land ownership. I know there's one South Dakota rancher a lot of us maybe have heard of, who's Amanda Radke, and she shared a lot about how legislation surrounding land ownership and property rights isn't always favorable to farmers and ranchers. And just recently, during the legislative session there in South Dakota, talked about how landowner rights are already in the Constitution. And I think that sentiment is really something that speaks to this conversation we're having today.
Right. And it's kind of one of the more important things if you talk to farmers, as far as young farmers and their goals for the future, what is it? Land ownership. I mean, that's something that they all want, especially if it's multi-generational and it's been, a family farm that's been in the family for years and decades and even over a century in many cases. So that's why ownership of land seems so important to our farmer readers and listeners, like in Nebraska, although China doesn't own much farmland, there's certainly a trend of China purchasing farmland around the world. And this has sparked, a ton of new state legislation around the country, many states banning foreign ownership of farmland by our adversaries. And they list China among those. So that's kind of where the legislation thing has been going from what I've been hearing.
Yeah, I know. I think new legislation has been working through the process in states like Oklahoma and Ohio, for instance. So Josh, our policy reporter for Farm Progress, wrote an article back in January citing USDA source reporting foreign investment in American ag land has increased to almost 40 million acres in 2021. And China has been one of the countries most interested in controlling U.S. farmland, it appears. According to Josh, American Farm Bureau Federation says that not all foreign land holdings should necessarily be considered negative, but there are concerns that AFBF believes foreign ownership should be monitored closely. The Agriculture Foreign Investment Disclosure Act of 1978 is how this monitoring is taking place right now, coordinating between several federal agencies, including the Defense and Treasury, to identify transactions that might pose a security risk. To that end, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GOA, released a report on January 18th that has recommended 6 actions on how reporting and evaluating processes could be improved to get a handle on that monitoring.
I read about this, Sarah. GOA was worried that information needs to be more up to date, more specific, and a report is needed more often than the current schedule of once a year. So I think USDA has requested funding to develop a more real-time system that can assess potential risks more quickly. Among the recommendations they made was having the Secretary of Agriculture establish a process to provide detailed and timely AFIDA transaction data on foreign investments in ag land, including whether the party has filed a disclosure, who filed it, when it was filed. They also recommended that the Ag Secretary provide specific instructions to headquarters and county FSA, Farm Service Agency employees for completing their reporting responsibilities. These and other recommendations are all aimed at making sure that entities that purchase U.S. farmland are basically who they say they are. And it allows them the ability to review any potential security risks that might come up with any of these transactions.
Of course, all of this means that not only are the foreign companies and countries that are investing in U.S. farmland will have to jump through more hoops with these transactions, but it might just mean more paperwork for American farm family corporations in the long run, who also have to prove that they are who they say they are. And that's just the way it works. And a lot of this is still shaking out in the state legislatures and Congress, so we'll have to wait and see what actually passes, kind of like we're always talking about. Policy changes so fast, we always have to keep track of it. And it's a good idea to keep track of legislation in your own state, whether touching base with your state farm bureau or farmers union organizations, just kind of keeping track so you can have some voice in these bills as they move along the process over the next few months and even the next few years.
Yeah, and this policy stuff moves. Sometimes it moves really fast and sometimes it moves really slowly. So it just requires a lot of persistence in keeping track. But I guess we should answer our original question, is Bill Gates the largest landowner in the U.S.? Now, we might think so. Many people are very concerned that he owns a lot of U.S. farmland, but from what I understand, he just isn't even close to the largest farmland owner, according to Land Report 100, just 42nd on the long list, as we said before.
You know, it's kind of like how China's always in the news. Bill Gates is always in the news with all those kind of theories about why he's buying farmland. But I know I'm really torn on the issues of farmland ownership. You know, on one end, I really appreciate the value-added agriculture ventures that come and benefit growers in the areas with processing plants or other ventures coming in. Sometimes those are owned by foreign entities, sometimes not. And on the other hand, I also feel very strongly that local farmers and ranchers kind of deserve first dibs on that land if they want it. Where they're not going to get outbid by some companies or countries' deep pockets, and kind of keeping that land in the family. And so I do like this data that you share in that article in Nebraska Farmer, saying that at least 88% of all farms in the U.S. are family farms. And of course, that might be a family corporation, but the operations and day-to-day decision-making are being made by families actually living and working on the land.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a myth out there. Many folks who are not connected to ag believe that corporations own and operate the majority of farmland and run everything we do out here. I mean, some families have built corporations, but the structure of those looks a lot like the family farms of old. They're just maybe more family members and generations pooling resources just out of necessity for finances, equipment, labor, management, and inputs than years ago.
Yeah, there's definitely a big difference in family corporations and businesses versus those foreign ownerships. You're just buying land just to buy it. So another note I want to make is that all farms are good farms around here, no matter how they're farmed or what the size is. So, well, Kurt, as we wrap up today's Farm Files episode, I don't think we really solved anything, but we at least talked through a number of topics that are related to ownership of land. And maybe we got our listeners thinking about these issues that are really hot topics right now.
Yeah, it'll be something for farmers to continue to monitor to see how all this new legislation shakes out and maybe provide a voice for themselves, you know, with policymakers. I know in Nebraska, the previous legislation we had governing foreign ownership went back to 1889. So it's probably time for an update, I would say. Well, that's it for this Farm Files version of FP Next, powered by John Deere. To our listeners, we want to thank you for listening to this episode of FP Next, allowing us into your tractor cab, your truck, on your farm, and in your fields. A special thank you goes out to our digital production and marketing team members who put in a lot of work with us. And we will add links to my story in Nebraska Farmer on foreign ownership and Josh's January story about federal efforts to better monitor foreign ownership into our podcast description. Now, look for those story links in this episode descriptions. And if you want to be sure not to miss any top stories, sign up for our Farm Progress text blasts, which bring the hot stories right to your inbox.
You can sign up for those text alerts by texting FARM, F-A-R-M, to 20505. Be sure to follow Farm Progress on social media to stay up to date with ag news and more, and check out the digital edition of your regional publication at farmprogress.com. Tune into our next episode of FP Next for a special Field View episode covering all you need to know about getting your planter ready for busy season from some super knowledgeable and entertaining folks from our friends at John Deere.
Yes, this is a great topic, and hopefully we can provide some tips for farmers in planter prep so they can avoid downtime, that dreaded downtime during that hectic planting season.
Follow along with FP Next by listening and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or at Farm Progress Online. And now you can even find us on YouTube. Wherever you listen, just be sure to leave us a review if you enjoy the show.
Yes, and Sarah always says 5 stars or nothing.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, if it's agriculture, your friends at Farm Progress have you covered. Here's wishing you high yields and good weather. We'll see you next time.